I know today we have a couple of good topics. We wanted to talk about dual agency was a big one. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
And there was something else that popped up over the weekend. Did you see in the Union Tribune, they put out the SDAR Recognition of Excellence 2-page spread?
I didn't see that, but I'm sure we were well represented.
It was amazing. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to publicize that in a way that sounds good. But it was not even close.
Wow. I'm not surprised. I mean, for the first 3 years here, it seems like all of the real estate rock stars have, a good portion of them made their way to Compass. So I wouldn't be surprised.
That seems like, isn't that the thing that matters? You know, every agency, every brokerage, what does Liz say? Every brokerage is number one at something. They all have a way to measure themselves. But what would matter to me is where are the high producing agents? Production per agent would seem like a key stat, and what brokerage is attracting the people who are doing the most business? That tells you about the brokerage without any other kind of measures. And we were 3 times as many agents as any of the next closest. So you can say all the things you want, but the agents are voting with their feet.
Yeah.
And the people who've already been here 2 or 3 years, congratulations. Those are always the ones that are ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Right. It was a great start.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that with our platform, the 3 stages of marketing that we encourage, the private exclusive, the coming soon, the active, next up, I think I've always believed people hire people, not companies. And so I think it's so important, the relationship the individual has with their centers of influence that dictate the velocity and the amount of business they're going to do. Once that decision has been made, one of the best assets any top producer has is the network they're affiliated with and what the value proposition is to the customer, which I'm not sure agents talk about that enough, because I think if they did, they would embrace that wholeheartedly, in the sense that if you're going to use like a private exclusive as your first stage of marketing, the seller might think, no, I absolutely, because they're convinced, like I was for so many years, and I know that Jeff Douglas was, and Liz, and every manager, we're wired to believe, and it's, in some cases, it's still very true. The more we expose, the more optics we create for anything that's for sale, right? The faster and better price. But there has been a shift mentally. We have to accept that, right? If we resist that, that's what it means to be a learning-based person, is to say, okay, what is the modernity going on here? And to be able to tell the seller at a listing appointment that I'm networking with the top, at the very minimum, top 5% of every real estate agent that exists in this space, we can say that we're networking with. And when that listing first goes to market, as we park it and prepare, whether it's a concierge, we want to test our price, or whatever we want to do in the private exclusive space, which we could talk about that, right? It goes on forever. But point is that no one, when you have top market share and you're working with this type of agent base, no one can make the claim that we're having more conversations about real estate with some of the most influential agents in the space. No one is having more of those conversations than Compass.
I agree with you, and you bring up a great segue, so I'm just going to challenge it right now. The clear cooperation policy, and we've developed a 3-step marketing system around that, and maybe we need to go into that, and maybe not everyone is aware, but I'm going to make the point that this wasn't the intention when NAR created this, but they are almost begging you to be a dual agent. The rules as set up are leading you to dual agency on every transaction. Now, is that a good thing, a bad thing? What's your take on dual agency?
Well, it's a good thing in the sense that if you are able to shepherd the transaction forward in the interest of both parties in a way that, if you can effectively move to that neutral state, which isn't easy for some, but I think it has a benefit to both sides. Clearly, that's why so many buyers today seek out the listing agent. They're not even thinking about how they're protected fiduciary-wise. Their value proposition is, if I go to you, I get a deal. The seller feels, if you procure the buyer, and if we can pre-negotiate some sort of split, which so many agents, by the way, I'm not in favor of. They kind of presuppose that value in their listing presentation before it's even asked for, which erodes your profit margin. That's another conversation. But I think that there are agents that are very effective at that. And I think the only tricky spot is when you get more than one buyer tapping on you for that same listing. I think that's where there's a real conflict of interest. And I think that, the agents, when that happens, they have to be able to, once they've made the decision on whatever buyer they're working with, they need to start handing any other buyer off as a referral to a fellow Compass agent to represent the interest of that party, because I just don't see a way around handling personally. Right now, you may have. I'd love to hear what your take is, but I just don't see how you handle 4 or 5 buyers for the same property that you have listed. I just
hold on for point of clarity. It sounds like you're saying the conflict of interest is greater between representing multiple buyers than it is between representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Yeah. Am I understanding right?
Pretty much. I think that's absolutely, in my case, I think that's true, because inevitably you have to, with the seller, share all of that critical information with every buyer that has come to you. And then ultimately the seller has to ask you, okay, who do we run with? And that puts you in a really terrible spot, or it puts you in a tough spot, actually not terrible, tough spot, to have to then make a decision. And if you represent that buyer and it doesn't come together, well, then you've just, I can
see
feel like,
that. But it's also part of our due diligence. Our value is to know the buyers. And this is a unique situation, but it is happening right now. We have the listing and we have multiple buyers coming to us.
Yeah.
Part of my job is to delve into every buyer. What's their motivation? What's their financial backing? What's their plans? Things I can ask them privately. And then when the seller says, what do you think? I can give them analysis. This is what the prices look like. This is, in my judgment, the level of commitment to the home. I can give it that feedback in a generalized sense to avoid any kind of fair housing problems. But if I know the buyers, I can give them my top 3, let's say. And they still make the ultimate choice.
Right. Yeah, I think it really depends on the level of comfort that an agent has in moving to a neutral space, because that's where you have to operate from. Because you can provide information without nudging someone forward. If a seller asks you a question, you answer it. Now, who do you feel is in the best position? Well, it's not my decision to make that decision, Mr. Missile, but what I can tell you is, if your number one concern, as it was before the buyers entered our world, when we took the listing, you said your main concern was to make sure this thing is closed on time by this date. And based on the offers that we're looking at, if you're asking me, I would have you take a look at this buyer or that buyer who are, this is their timeline. They're willing to not only close in 14 days, but they're willing to let you stay for 2 weeks at no cost to you.
Right.
So in the event that anything changes in your plans, that might be something you'd want to consider that could add value to you. It's that sort of thing that I think you can be effective at if you do not cross the line. I mean, the problem is, even to this day, I still hear agents, when they represent both sides, they refer to their seller, the one that they have the principal relationship with, the one that initiated. My seller, well, no, it's not your seller. You got to be really careful when you're in dual agency to never use those words. It's always the seller, the buyer. I mean, it's really important, because at some point when you represent both sides and you start using language like that, because words are really important, someone's going to say, well, wait a minute now, I thought you were also helping me here. You keep talking about the seller and me as some client. You're helping me here too, don't forget. And then the deal goes sideways, right, and they tell their attorney that's how you spoke.
Well, and before we get too far off it, I want to point out something you said that is really important, whether it's a dual agency or not. Setting that expectation with the seller. Most people tend to think the highest price is the best offer. Right. And that's not always true, and often isn't true. So when you said it, what is it exactly you're looking for? How important is it that our degree of confidence in this closing, the time frame, the finances behind it? It's not always price. It's price that will reasonably close in our belief, which is a completely different thing.
And we're learning things about the buyers out there. Are many buyers that are throwing silly numbers around that will,
Why are they silly? Hold
throw,
on. How are they silly?
They'll throw a number at the seller all day long. It doesn't mean they're going to buy it or that they're going to perform. I mean, look, every agent on here knows that if they've had a multiple offer situation, or they're representing some buyers, they know that there are buyers out there today that are dropping offers on multiple properties, just trying to, in other words, they're throwing lines in the water the first or 2 or 3 strikes they get. If they can get 1 or 2 homes on the hook, then the process moves from, they're able to then choose which home they want to move forward with based on what investments they want to make through their due diligence period. But they've tied up the home by throwing a big number at the seller, and then they don't perform. So it's your job to be able to,
correct me if I'm wrong. That's ethically wrong. As a buyer's agent, writing 2 offers even is ethically, you've crossed the line.
That's exactly right, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. And
no, I agree.
Not everyone in our business is ethical, right? We know that.
Right. And by the way, we've talked about this before. The best way, in my opinion, to get rid of poor agents and not ethical agents isn't with a lot more rules or barriers to entry. It's just to be that much better. Be so good that they can't ignore you. Be so good that the bad ones leave the business. They go bankrupt. They get out.
Yeah.
That should be our goal. Okay, so back to the dual agency, because I've always had an ethical problem with that. Although now I feel that this is pretty much how the industry is set up. And it's how the industry was originally set up. Right? If you go back pre-MLS, if you go back early 70s, 60s and before, a seller went to a real estate brokerage and said, sell my home. The brokerage said, great, we'll charge you 6%. And then they went out and found a buyer and sold the home. The whole idea of sharing and splitting commissions came along later. And then we started separating, responsibilities. Now it did get to a point where I found it very ethically challenging. How can you can't take on fiduciary obligation for a seller and a buyer. That's not physically possible. Are we keeping one? Are we becoming neutral? We no longer have a fiduciary responsibility to either client?
I think we do, actually. I think you can. I think it's possible. I understand where you're coming from, because I personally, when I was selling real estate, those were always scenarios that I liked the least. Mm-hmm. Because I knew that the eyes and the optics, they were really intense. The lights got really bright when you represented both sides. I did have it kind of through learning experiential, going through the process, and then having been coached up right by a great mentor, learned how to play the referee. And part of it goes back to my days when I was in Colorado, right before I moved to California. Colorado was one of the first states that was an all-broker state. And what all that means for the sake of this conversation was that they were the very first state in the country that allowed for this type of agency called transaction broker. And think referee. Just think referee. Mm-hmm. So in Colorado, you have to make a decision. Does the seller let me work as a dual? And in many cases, they do. So if I move to that state where I'm automatically a transaction broker, and in Colorado, and the fiduciary guidelines are set out in a document that has to be acknowledged by both parties. So in a place like that, it's not that hard to adopt that and bring it into our space, whether the state of California does it or not, because the fact that they do it there gives you the recipe for success, which means that it's really simple, Mr. and Mrs. Anything I've learned about our relationship, that if the buyer knew about it would give them leverage over you, I cannot have that conversation. Just as anything I learned about that buyer, that if you knew about it, that would give you leverage over them, I can't share that either. So the advantage to you is simply this: everything I know about the buyer as it relates to their ability to perform, you will have a direct conduit. There's no other agent. We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to guess of whether or not they're telling us the truth. You'll know it, because I'm going to be the one on that side. So there's a definite advantage to you, and that the communication should be as good as it will ever be in a transaction, because I'm the point of contact, and then we just have to work with escrow and title. So in communication, in a transaction is often where everything breaks down. So to me, I can still advise on both sides, right? I can tell the seller that if I believe that this offer is not good enough, that it's not where I think we can get higher, I can tell them that. I can absolutely advise them. And I can tell the buyer where I think they need to be to get the property without disclosing any price that the seller has told me they'd take, right? If I'm advising them, where do I need to be to get this house? The first place to start would be what the seller's asking for.
Right.
I mean, like, so if we know that's what they said in the MLS, what they say yes to, and if there's no other buyers there, then you start there and you just work your way through helping them evaluate comps and helping them make an intelligent, informed decision based on information.
So playing this from the other side, then, you might even say to them, it's interesting, whenever we want to solve a problem, we go to mediation. That's the best choice we consider. That's exactly what we're arguing for here. The agent's almost becoming the mediator. Let me try to help this work out to the best for both sides.
I think that's the role in its essence, right?
So tie commission into this.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me a week ago. I'm sorry, I want to set this up for you. A week ago, you and I did a thing on, hey, this property is going to go into escrow right away. Why should I pay you full list?
Yeah.
And then less than a week ago, Kathy in the sales meeting had a great whole thing on with buyers and lately, I found the property she brought up. I found the property. Why should you get the full commission? And now we get, okay, you're going to be a dual agent. You didn't even have to put it on the market, for instance. Maybe you brought the buyer. Why should you get full commission? Not full. We shouldn't even use that word, right? You brought that up. That's a great, words matter. There's no such thing as full commission.
Right. Well, here's the thing. Whether, and by the way, I believe this to be true in the heart of my heart, that I've believed our industry, I believe many of the brokerages in this industry have failed the agent in this way. I have never attended a class or a training where it was anything about anything other than sales. There's never been a segment that talks about what your value proposition is as an agent and what you really do. And I believe that in your own, there are two roles that you play that I believe are absolute. One is you're a microeconomist. You have to be that way to evaluate what's going on in the market to help sellers. The second thing, when buyers and sellers come together, you're a risk manager. So whether that house sells in a day or it sells in 6 months, once people sign stuff, that's when the heavy lifting begins. It's what I talked about last week. It doesn't take a lot of talent to run an ad. It doesn't take a lot of talent to put a sign in the ground. It doesn't take a lot of talent to hire an expert photographer to put those photographs together and throw them on social media and put them in the MLS. That requires an eye. The person executing the photographs has to have a good eye, right? But that's not a lot of talent. That's what people are paying you 3% for. What they're paying you 3% for on the side of the deal, or 2.5, whatever the number, right, is so that when people sign stuff, that the covenant that they're making with one another, those things take place as they should. And it doesn't matter if it takes a day or it takes a week. Those things don't change. And furthermore, when you take on the liability of both sides, this rush to discount so greatly that if I had this, tell me if you haven't had this call as a manager. I see Liz and I saw Jeff on the call here a moment ago on my screen. Hey, I got a friend of mine who's been renting a house, and they're really good friends with the landlord / now seller, and they want to buy it, and they asked me if I would do it for 1%. If I could I'm just going to do the paperwork. Excuse me. Isn't that what you do every transaction? You're always just doing the paperwork. But when people start suing you, and the insurance carrier looks at, okay, what was the skin in the game here? We could have real problems. I'm telling you, there are insurance carriers that have a real problem when there's a suit brought about the brokerage and there's no money, there's no skin in the game. Because their perception is you weren't paying it. Well, how could you have possibly been invested in this transaction at 1%? And
it makes sense.
I'm going down a rabbit hole we don't need to go down, but that's a concern. But look, I just feel like there are 174 tasks, to the best of our knowledge, that have to take place after people sign stuff to keep the deal moving forward. That's a lot of work. a lot of work, and it's a lot of risk that you take on. The idea that you would just discount yourself because the house sells in a day, or that you don't at least attempt to tell the seller beforehand that if they price it right in this market, don't be surprised, Mr. and Miss Seller, that this house might sell in a day. Heck, it might sell before I get back to the office. I might have 2 or 3 offers on this thing. 2 things. It doesn't mean we've undervalued the home. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy going forward.
I agree with you 100%. Although I want to add something going back. You said the 2 great things. We are a microeconomist, and then you said a risk manager. Once we begin, I would add a third. We're a short-term therapist. There's a lot of emotion and fear to manage, and especially if you're doing dual agency. But I knew we were going to get to that, and I wrote down. I wanted to get your opinion of this because this is coming up before when people are discounting commission because it's the buyer found it, or it's going to go into escrow right away. What you're saying is my primary value is putting a sign in the yard, or paying for an ad, things like that. That, like you just said, we can pay people to do that. Yeah. So I wrote down my definition of what we're actually paid for. We're paid for our expertise in protecting and maximizing a client's financial well-being while preventing and minimizing their emotional stress. That is a lot of expertise. That's a lot of experience. You need to have a hell of a brokerage and a team around you. And it's got nothing to do with signs or ads or how many open houses you hold, which we hold only to generate more business. It's nothing to do with selling the home.
Only somebody who doesn't believe in what they do entirely. It's not going to hurt for some people to hear this, right? But only someone who doesn't believe in what they do would ever even consider doing both sides of a transaction for 1%. Knowing what's involved, paperwork or not. I mean, it's all about paperwork. I got news for everybody on this call. It's always about paperwork. And it's about what you just said too, managing expectations and the emotions. It's always about paperwork. It's just a matter of what do you see your value is? And then, like we talked about last week, at least getting, what do they say about neurolinguistic programming? That actually 7% of the words you use, the words matter, that about 58% is body language and tonality. So that when someone asks you a question that would be so offensive to your nature, that you not recoil and say, well, let me think about that, or versus saying, well, that's an interesting question. Help me understand what it is about paying me 1% to handle both sides of this transaction and manage it to a successful outcome. Right? I mean, if you just lean in and talk like that. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Right. But it starts with knowing your value, or how are you going to be able to stand up. And you mentioned, I'm going to bring a 1 degree of math into this. Hey, when you're a dual agent, the lights get brighter, right? There's being more. Yeah, right. I would argue that the liability has more than doubled. The fact that you took on 2 sides doesn't mean it's exactly twice as much. It's more. You've opened up things that never existed on either side before that. And liability is a big part of this, which we don't think about it except in January when we pay our E&O thing and go, what is this? I hate paying for E&O. But that's a nonstop problem and a very important value that's brought to the client. But if something does go wrong that's beyond any of our measure, beyond any of our knowledge, we're insured. We're still going to bring this about and fix it.
Sean, for you, someone you're much more recently out of the sales business. You've run, and you have been successful. First of all, I don't think a lot of people, if they don't remember, Princeton grad, so there's a good head on the shoulders there, right? No, I'm serious. I'm a smart guy, running a very successful business. I assume you've been confronted with this issue, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you're not the only. So I'm not the only one.
No.
But if you were to give one piece of advice to people, newly minted as a manager, but a lot of experience and success as a salesperson, what is it you want everyone on this call to know, or where should they go to find that connection to their value proposition? I mean, if they struggle with this, because listen, it's okay to struggle with it, because there are a lot of people that when they get asked that question, God, yeah, I mean, it did sell a day, and I haven't done anything, and no marketing, and I should discount them something. I mean, that's a natural reaction, isn't it? Right? If you
Yes.
don't know, if you're not. So what would you,
And
what piece of advice would you give someone?
well, first of all, by the way, thank you, but our team was successful because I have a lot of help, including my wife, who actually runs the thing. So a lot of credit goes there.
Well,
and we both know this. In the absence of value, price is the only thing to discuss. So my advice always will be, unless you can sit down and articulate your value in a heartfelt way, stop. Get with somebody. Get with one of us. Ask somebody you know. A great way to understand what your actual value is, ask your 5 closest friends. They'll know you in that light better than you do, because we tend to all be self-effacing. We're not me. I'm nothing special about me. It's hard. The hardest thing about being a real estate agent is you have to go against all the things you were taught about how to be a good citizen. You have to talk to strangers. You have to ask personal questions. You have to tell people that you're good at what you do. None of these things are comfortable. We've been taught since children not to do it, and to know your value. And you know how I feel about this. Real estate agents are number 2 to doctors. They're the second most valuable advisor in a person's life, bar none. But if you don't know that, if you don't feel that, then it's impossible to convey it. No script is going to do it. So I would stop what I'm doing right now, get with a friend, get with a manager, get with a mentor, and talk that through until you can remove some of those roadblocks and truly, viscerally feel who you are and what you do for people.
It's so funny this weekend, and I see this all the time, where my agents will get these testimonial letters, and the first thing they'll want to do, and they should, is anytime you get those, you want to share those, but they'll go to social media. Ashley Constance, I believe she's in La Jolla, right? She posted on social media, and she just put a clip of the note card of God, how much that client valued her, just what an impact they had. In a time where people want to devalue you to the lowest common denominator, right? The outside brokerages, the discount brokers like the Redfins of the world, mean them no harm. I'm just stating it like it is, or Zillow, whoever. This is why you're so important still, and always will be, because of the connection you make and the emotional, what's the buckets that you carry on behalf of your clients to help nurse them through what is the most stressful transaction, really one of the most stressful transactions I'll ever have. So
probably
even
most
today,
important financially.
Oh, for sure, well, absolutely. Right.
You know, and I saw Brian commented, it's not the 30 minutes or the hours or the 174 things. It's all the experience that makes you good at that is what they're paying for. And that's what we've been arguing in different ways over the last couple of weeks. You understand what you're actually bringing to the table. It's not the 10 minutes the electrician turned the screw. It's knowing which screw to turn. That's what you're paying for. Did we, and Liz, I know we're getting close on time. Do we have questions or anything we need to be addressing? Does any sales manager have a comment about dual agency?
There are not questions in the chat, just one comment from Katie, who says, I think it's a conflict of interest all the way around. And she put that in, I think specifically when you were talking about representing multiple buyers and the seller. So I would love to chime in on that, if I may, because Kathy's got a very strong opinion about that, and I agree with her wholeheartedly. It's about the perception of impropriety. You know, it's the world we live in, right? So, you may think you're communicating very well, and you may think you're being honest and forthright with every party involved, but at some point they may feel that you're not advising them, A, because you cannot, you have way too much knowledge, you have to be really careful. They may feel like you took another buyer's preferential over them. And even if you did it all the way around, you are still going to be held up to a higher scrutiny. You cannot stand in front of a judge, let's just be honest, and say, oh, but Your Honor, I had their best interest at heart. Well, but they didn't get the offer. Your other buyer got the offer, and you represented the seller. And in what way were you looking out for these clients? If you cannot, here we're talking about establishing your value proposition. If you can't defend that, explain to me how you're going to defend standing up in front of a judge and saying, no, Your Honor. It's the same when I get the calls for people wanting to double end their own transaction. And I tell them, you cannot you cannot convince me or anyone else that you have the buyer's best interest at heart if you're the seller. And agents will argue that they can do that. And I'm like, no, you can't. No, you can't. It's not physically possible. So
you're against dual agency.
I'm not against dual agency. I'm against representing multiple buyers on your listing. And we're seeing that a lot. I'm getting those calls a lot. Well, I already wrote an offer and I have 2 other people that want me offers. No, stop it. Don't do it. Get a referral fee. Give it out.
Tell us what you really think, Liz.
That's what I really think. Stop it. Stop it. You want to keep your commission. You don't want to lose it.
Right. And want to be in the business for a long time.
Correct.
Because it's a fantastic business. All right. Anybody else have comments? Because I know we're about to run over inside the huddle.
Yeah.
No? Good.
Dual, Brian Westry wrote in, Kathy says dual agency, there's no one else to blame but you.
That's right. The liability more than doubled. All right, I hope you guys, one of the things that Steve and I are talking about a lot right now is your value in various scenarios. It's especially important in this market. So if you have questions or if you're not sure of it, call your sales manager. Go have a heart-to-heart, because it's really, really important that you're able to know it and convey it. Any last words, big boy?
Well, there are few jobs in the world where you do so much in advance before you ever get paid a dime. And I've been a realtor. I was in sales. I was pretty successful myself in my own right. And I was only successful because I had really good people around me that helped me see what I did mattered. I got into real estate because I just wanted to make more money than what I was making at my job at Chrysler back in Detroit. That's why I got into real estate. I wanted a path where I could make more money. I did not come in to it as an entrepreneur mindset of I'm going to do something here and build this business and I'm going to, impact people's lives and through buying and selling of real estate. That's not what I did. That's not how I got in. Once I got into the business, and I loved houses too, but once I got in and realized just how emotional the transaction is. Like my very first appointment I ever had, very first appointment was my broker telling me to go knock on a for sale by owner door and schedule an appointment. And I did that and had doors slammed in my face and thought, oh my God, what have I done? I wonder if they'll take me back. Chrysler, this is not, I don't want to deal with this is harsh, harsh life, having people tell you no, and slamming doors in your face. And then I'll just wrap up that in the very first for sale by owner appointment I was able to secure, I walked in and walked out of there within 5 minutes. Because I didn't even know what to say. I didn't even know what the point was. My broker didn't set me up with all of the tools and dialogues of why it was important to list with a real estate professional. He believed, like a previous mentor of mine, in space training. Give me something to do that was easy, and then go back and fill in the things I wish I had the week before. That's what he believed, my first broker. So he was kind of a sadistic son of a broker in that he would have me do these things, and then he'd fill in the blanks, and it would just etch in my slate. Because when I showed up, and I could hear the vacuum wind, like they were scrambling to put the vacuum away because they had just fed the kids at 6:30. They had just wrapped up dinner, and I'm showing up, and I'm in and out there in 5 minutes. They're looking at me when I'm walking out without even having a conversation. Like, what the hell was that all about? I remember that to this day, how I felt when I walked out, like I wasted their time. And when I went to my broker, he filled in the blanks after that. And so who you are on this call and how you got here, you've paid your dues. I don't even know most of you on the call, except for my peeps. And I know that to be a truth about you. So you have something special. And if you do this long enough and you get to the point where you're at Compass, then what you do is making a big difference in people's lives. Mm-hmm. And the sooner and quicker we continue to embrace that, the better we'll be able to hold the line against people who just see you as really of having no value other than to help them find a house and open the
Very,
door.
very well said. And at 7:35, let's end with your words. Go out and make a difference in people's lives.
Yep.
Have an awesome day, everybody.
All right, you guys. See ya.